Flavio Mora, and your first name is one of our favorite first names.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you so much for coming, and let me hand this over to you now.
Oh, welcome to Mackenzie. It's a pleasure to have all of you here, and we are glad to our God to have this meeting here, because we know that knowledge is one of the most important things to break the actual realities. And we are close to the concept of Fraser Institute. One of our targets in the past is to create the Mackenzie Liberty Economic Freedom here in the university. In fact, I'm president of the institute. The university is one of our unities here in Brazil. We have more or less 150,000 students with us. Yes. 50,000 in the colleges, and 100,000 in the high schools or in the basic education. We are planning to increase our participation in the education in Brazil, mainly through the basic education, where our teacher, Professor Vladimir, is giving some classes to our high school students, bringing the knowledge to them and influencing the families about these concepts in Brazil. That's why we are working as much as we can to achieve the goal to have more schools teaching in our system. We have a system where we are teaching, where we are presenting to schools and to have the kids studying through our system, education system. Well, we have 3 main points to say hello, using the words or the words that this environment understands. The first one is the call. We have a call to be here and to bring the knowledge, to contrast and to bring discussions about what is better for the humanity. This is the first. The second is work. We are working as much as we can to provide this knowledge, to bring this knowledge to as much possible or as much people as possible. And to the end, we have expectation. We have the hope to achieve the goals, or the goal that is to keep the freedom alive. Then we always say, call, work, and blessings. And this is very related to our culture. Mackenzie, since the beginning, has the Bible open, and the relation between these concepts of economic freedom and the scripture. This is the base, the basement, and the why we are conducting these concepts here in Mackenzie. In fact, we are open to the needs and open to the knowledge, bringing together, and that is the Fraser Institute mission and vision. We always are looking for the way to become the environment where we are, transform it to bring happiness and the better way to live the lives that we receive from our God. Then, that's why we are here, to work together in this beautiful place. I know that it is. The brickles that remember us of our past. The place is full of places where we can remember where we are from and what we are still doing, working over our principles. Then, thank you very much. You are in home. Mackenzie for these days are your home, and what you need, please just say something, because we are here to serve you in our needs and in your needs, and to bring the better environment over this table or where, doesn't matter where, here in Mackenzie, to have the best meeting as possible for you all. Thank you very much.
Just let me add that we're very grateful to your hospitality, and I think we all certainly feel very, very welcome. So thank you, and thanks, Vlad. I should also mention, since you said the Fraser Institute, that the founder of the Fraser Institute and the founder of the Economic Freedom of the World Work, Mike Walker, is there. So Mike will be speaking a little bit later. Thank you for hosting us. Vladimir, you're next.
Welcome and thank you very much for being here with us. I would say that this meeting is very important to our Economic Freedom Center. We are working since 2016, so 7 years working. And having this meeting and discuss economic freedom with Fraser Institute here and France, it's very important to us as part of our path to become more relevant to the Brazilian economy and Brazilian institutions. Our center is the only classical liberal university think tank in Brazil. So for us it's an honor to host this meeting. Thank you very much.
Over to my successor, Matt Mitchell, who will be succeeding me in this post next year.
Thank you very much. My job really is to say thanks and for the warm welcome and the gracious hosts that you all have been. And I wanted to sort of use my time for a second to say some kind words about Fred. So all of you know Fred. You know that he has done more than just about anybody, except for, of course, Mike Walker, to advance the cause of economic freedom. Fred is a journalist turned researcher turned evangelist for economic freedom. He's probably circumnavigated the globe 20 times. 70 countries, 50 different trips. Fred was instrumental, of course, in building this network of economic freedom warriors. He's also been instrumental intellectually in developing several, I think, really innovative products. The world's first subnational economic freedom index, the Economic Freedom of America, which Mackenzie had as a base for their subnational index. Also working with Ian Vasquez in promoting the Human Freedom Index, and developing and promoting the Human Freedom Index. And he's been a tireless advocate of economic freedom going around the world and advising policymakers on making their countries more free and really bridging that gap between the intellectual case for economic freedom and real world policy and real world change. So I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the great contribution that Fred has made, and delighted to say that he's going to continue doing the economic freedom audits next year. So for that, I thank you. And I also want to personally thank you for all the grace and being an intellectual mentor to me. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that was a surprise, and thank you. And now over to Mike Walker. There's a microphone. Oh, good. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Fred, and it's wonderful for us to be here with such a distinguished group of people. I'm not a man of a few words, and Fred has asked me to make a few comments of the origins of the economic freedom of the World Index, the only way for me to do that in a way that respects the time that we have available is for me to have written it. So I've written it, and I apologize for what has to be an egocentric kind of presentation, but the truth of the matter is that it was a kind of a personal thing with me, and I apologize. It's become a project of literally thousands of people, but in the beginning it was that. Well, I've always had sometimes a near fatal curiosity about how things work, mechanically and electrically. And when I finished my first degree in economics, I knew that I wanted to do technical economics, and in particular to build mathematical models of how economies worked and how they failed. My college econometrics teacher, Leonard Pluto, a wonderful Polish genius, told me that T.M. Brown, a physicist turned economist, who had built the first model of the Canadian economy and was an inventor of a powerful systems estimator, which many of you will know as simultaneous least squares, had just joined the faculty at Western University. So I took my Woodrow Wilson Fellowship and went to Western to work with Professor Brown. Well, it was a dream. And with guidance from Professor Brown, I built the first econometric model in Canada that had a fully functional financial sector as my PhD thesis. Building a 100+ equation model of the economy is one thing. Getting the damn thing to solve so that you can do simultaneous simulations with it was another matter. And I surprised myself and many colleagues by being very good at getting things to solve. That as I was building my model, the Bank of Canada, which is Canada's central bank, had started to build its own model, and in conversation with them found that they were having trouble getting their model to solve. Well, I showed them how I got mine to solve, and they sent me a job offer by return mail. So I worked with the Bank of Canada for half a decade, and then was asked by the Deputy Minister of Finance if I would join the Federal Department of Finance to bring my econometric measurement and modeling skills to bear on fiscal policy and how people's economic lives were affected by the much more politically driven policies adopted by the government. All of you, I'm giving you this personal history so you know where I came from in devising an index about economic freedom. And so I don't know any other way to get to it. Anyway, now where did I stop? Oh yes, I was asked about, okay. So while I was at the bank, for half a decade, then was asked by the Deputy Minister of Finance if I joined the Federal Department of Finance to bring my econometric modeling skills to bear on fiscal policy and how people's lives were affected by much more politically driven policies adopted by the government. And there's where I began to get the first itch about how governments really worked and how policies weren't really devised in this antiseptic way that was what was best for people. It was really a matter of political pressure and people wanting to get money out of it, all the kind of things which we all now know about. Well, I was young and I was, stupid, so it took me a while to understand. Well, while meeting T.M. Brown at Western University was important to my studies, another person I met at Western was to change my life. The person was Csaba Hajdú, a fellow graduate student and a former Hungarian freedom fighter. Csaba gave me a comprehensive education in the dangers of an all-powerful state like that in Hungary, as I was helping him with technical economics. We stayed in touch after I left the Bank of Canada, and Csaba left for British Columbia to work for McMillan Waddell, one of the world's largest pulp and paper and forest product companies. In 1968, just before I joined the Bank of Canada, Canada elected the flamboyant Pierre Trudeau as Prime Minister. Compared to history, Trudeau was a shift to the political left, and he proceeded to move fiscal and administrative policy in a leftist direction, including appointing senior civil servants with a leftist bent. The transitory impact was an expansionary fiscal policy which was accommodated by the Bank of Canada, and the inflation rate jumped to historically unprecedented levels. I was one of the outspoken critics of the policies within the bank, but as already noted, I had agreed to an offer, to accept an offer by the Deputy Minister of Finance to join his staff as the Finance Minister. There I thought I could have an impact on the source of the problem, which was the out-of-control spending levels of the government. Meanwhile, a hard-left NDP government NDP is the new Democratic Party. When people are about to take away our liberties, they invent names that will suggest just the opposite. So the new Democratic Party, a hard-left Marxist government, had been elected in the province of British Columbia, and their policies were causing economic havoc. And my old friend Csaba Hajdú and I were in regular contact discussing how the policies of the provincial and federal government were moving in a more and more socialist direction and how damaging that would be to the future. We came to realize that the real problem was not the particular public servants or minister who held the power, rather it was the fact that a misinformed electorate was continuously casting votes for governments that made promises that could only be delivered with disastrous consequences for the economy and the citizens. Well, Csaba persuaded his colleagues in the business community that there was a need for a new Canadian institute, like the Institute for Economic Affairs in London, which I'm sure many of you would be familiar with, that would provide a countervailing intellectual force that would challenge the failing policies that were destroying British Columbia and the country. So he and his superior, Patrick Boyle, asked me if I would come to British Columbia to set up such an institute. So I readily agreed, and so the Fraser Institute was born. The Fraser Institute's motto, "If it matters, measure it," is a direct reflection of my, Csaba Hajdú's, and Patrick's view that the key to all things good and sustainable is frequent, thoughtful, and constant measurement. So that is why the Fraser Institute, that is what the Fraser has done for nearly 50 years. And we measure everything that matters, and we do so consistently and better every year. We hold governments and the electorate that elects them accountable by showing in detail the consequences of government actions. And as you will see if you go to our website, www.fraserinstitute.org, we empower citizens to make their own judgments about the effect of government actions and policies. Well, against this background, and I'm coming to the point, I had to give you the background. Against this background, the notion of measuring the level of economic freedom came naturally, of course. We were measuring it. But I confess that at the beginning of the idea, I thought it might be fanciful. I approached an organization in the United States, Liberty Funding, which had a preoccupation with the ideas of freedom and how it affects people's lives, and I inquired whether they might provide a grant to the Fraser Institute to begin a program of research into how we might go about measuring economic freedom. I mean, now it seems obvious, you see. But then it wasn't. People said, what? Freedom. Well, before speaking to them, I had spoken to my friends Milton and Rose Friedman, and they had agreed. that they would be interested in being involved in the process. That's to put it mildly. Milton, well, we had a big, Rose and Milton had a big debate about it. We don't need to know all the details. But they were wonderful, wonderful people, and you know, a surrogate parents for me. So Liberty Fund was enthusiastic and agreed to fund a series of 3 international symposia, bringing together some of the world's top thinkers to consider the measurement of economic freedom. Milton and Rose Friedman's participation was key in attracting top people from around the world. And I mean, we got the cream of the crop from around the world. It's unbelievable. One of the participants was Ed Fullman, Jr., the president of the Heritage Foundation. He thought our idea to measure economic was so good that after participating in and learning from our symposia and the 3 books that they produced, decided to scoop the Fraser Institute and produce the Heritage Foundation Economic Freedom Index before we finished our scientific work and process and were ready to publish our results. As Milton Friedman said, Ed stole your idea. But you know, the good news is that as with most measurements, the more you do with it, the more you learn, even if the people are not great at respecting intellectual property rights. And I don't, you know, people always say to me, well, you know, because I'm still friendly with Ed. I think he did something that was not great, but the truth is that we need 25 institutes measuring economic freedom. It's the most important thing. It's the key thing for the future of the world, and we respect the importance of economic freedom. So the fact that we have 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 measurements of it is wonderful. Anyway, oh sorry, I'm really amazing. So the Economic Freedom of the World project is now in the direction of Fred McMahon. I've been so lucky that Fred agreed to take that on. It's a collaboration, and this is what's important. This project now is a collaboration of 124 institutes and foundations from 90 global jurisdictions. But I don't know of any project that has that kind of participation and engagement by so many people, including the Heritage Foundation. and all of whom provide inputs and observations about how the accuracy of the Fraser Economic Freedom of the World Index can be improved and made more effective at encouraging enhanced levels of economic freedom in every part of the world. So I apologize for what has been sort of egocentric presentation, but I think it gives you an idea, and we're so lucky to have Fred now running this project, and we're so fortunate that you all agreed to have an interest in your countries in promoting and working on this, because there isn't anything in economics that is more important than preserving the freedom of people to explore and invest and do the things that create the wealth that we all now take for granted. Don't take it for granted. Don't take it for granted. Work as hard as you can to preserve in your own countries this very fragile right to do what we do. Thank you very much.
Mike, I know I speak for everyone in the room and for many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. We owe you a huge debt for what you've done, not just in Canada in creating the Fraser Institute. Canadians need to be grateful about that, but for the worldwide work you have done in improving people's lives through the guidance of the economic freedom of the world.
It has to be said now that what a great weight. Level of expectation that we listen upon you, my friend. You're really doing.
Som, teste 1, 2, 1, 2, E. E som, teste 1, 2, A. A, som. É eu que tô falando aqui, é só o meu. Tá chegando legal? A, som. A.
Was communism, Marxism. But what we missed was that communism, Marxism, was fundamentally flawed and was never a long-term threat. Communism went against human nature, denial of religion, denial of common property, and the idea of human fellowship without prejudice so long as you were a member of the proletariat, regardless of your race, color, or religion. These things deny fundamental human nature, like property. We are religious, and we are not in fellowship with everyone else. So it is telling that when Russia fell, all the communist states went down at the same time. Arguably, there's only one communist nation left in the world, and that's Cuba. The others have turned into some version of nationalistic fascism. So that tells you the fragility of the whole communist ideology, that as soon as force was removed, it just disappeared. On the other hand, populism, either of the left or the right, appeals to basic human nature. And it turns out two fundamentals of human nature. Jealousy, we are a jealous creature, we don't like to see others get ahead. And tribalism, extended family, the way we evolved. I'm part of the right group, you're part of the wrong group, I'm good, you're evil. Those are fundamentals, and they appeal to the fundamental nature of being human. So this is a far greater long-term threat than communism ever was, because communism violated human fundamentals, where populism sadly appeals to our darkest instincts. And it's worth noting that tribalism and jealousy are antithetical to free markets. With free markets, you pick the best person, or you buy from the best shop, not your tribe shop, not your family shop. Now, no market is perfect, so of course we do favor our relatives, but the whole idea is that you treat others as individuals, not members of a tribe or members of an extended family. And that is essential for free markets to work. Another essential is lack of jealousy. When others get ahead through their own, and of course there is jealousy, but it has to be muted. So when others get ahead, you aren't upset or in an angry mood. So why did so many places turn at once to various forms of populism? Well, one factor was the end of the Cold War and the bipolar discipline that imposed upon the world. That is a very complicated subject. But one thing that happened importantly is that after the collapse of communism, after the collapse of the Russian Empire, a whole bunch, seeing the success of the West, many, many nations became democratic, or tried to become democratic. So that meant there were a whole bunch more nations fall away from democracy. And many of the new nations that developed towards democracy or tried to develop free markets didn't have the cultural basis for it. It is interesting to note that all the stable free market economies now are either in Europe or in nations that were heavily under the tutelage of the United States or Great Britain. So you have the European countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, which are the only really stable free market economies now in the world. So it's a limited group. I think what I've discovered in traveling about and being in 70 countries and working with think tanks in 40 is that there are big cultural issues that are necessary to make free markets stable. If your society is driven by tribalism or extended families, free markets become very difficult to maintain. If there's a huge jealousy of people who get ahead, free markets are difficult to maintain. But I think fundamentally is the idea of the individual as the atom of society rather than the tribe or extended family. And where that doesn't exist, it's hard, it's not possible, I think, to maintain free markets. Other factors, the world migration crisis, which of course sent people against people, undermined free markets and support for free markets, and led to populism. Leftover leftist ideology, which still infects many people, also weakened free markets and strengthened populism. And finally, and I'm disappointed to say this, I'm a social liberal, but the export of the West social liberalism to many countries was undermining. We have to remember that until a few decades ago, the idea of same-sex marriage would have horrified most people in the West. And now we go abroad and preach to societies, you must do it this way, and so on. As I say, I favor that. I'm a social liberal. But that has caused deep resentment in many countries. So migration crisis, lack of basic culture, lack of free market-friendly culture, and the preponderance of new democracies and free market economies, which really didn't have foundations for it, I think contributed to the populist way. Now, I've gone over my time, which means my list of solutions to all these problems will have to wait. We'll have to wait until later. So let me call on Jerry Jordan to make some remarks.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Fred. And I also want to extend my thanks to Vlad and President Milton and everyone else for being host, and also to Mike for having created the economic freedom idea and following it through up to this point and made it such a worldwide success that it is. Listening to Fred, I thought of, well, who am I going to blame for the mess that we're in and the course that we're on a worldwide basis for the trend that I consider to be negative? I would say the economic profession. Speaking as an economist, or I claim to be an economist, a lot of people doubt that. I learned maybe 40 or 50 years ago, I don't know, that something like 1/2 of the PhDs in economics in the United States never had a course in in accounting. They couldn't read a balance sheet. They couldn't read an income statement. The whole notion of debits and credits, and I thought, how can you understand march of the economy if you don't understand that. And that's because most of them in undergraduate were engineering majors. They were good at mathematics, and the economics gave them a field where they could use their mathematics to go build models, and therefore fiddle with the world. And they still want to fiddle with the world. Okay, now let me back up to the remarks that I had prepared to set the stage for what I think of how we started and how we got to where we are. At the time of the creation of the U.S. Constitution, Benjamin Franklin was asked by a crowd of people outside the hall in Philadelphia about the new government and said, "How long will this last?" And he said, "It will last until people learn that they can vote themselves some of other people's money." And we have certainly reached that point and beyond. If we had not before, then the pandemic, the recent coronavirus 19, instilled in a lot of people that the idea that they could live off of their neighbors' earnings, their resources. A problem goes to the root of the problem goes to the notion of property and the misunderstanding and the failure of the economic profession to teach about property. And mostly at graduate schools, you say something about property or what we call property rights. People will say, "Well, that's for the law school. What's that got to do with economics?" Well, to me, it's fundamental. James Madison wrote in the Federalist Papers that I have rights in my property the same as I have a property in my rights. And then he expanded upon not all these other rights. But the idea fundamental was property. And the original draft of the Constitution and our Declaration of Independence was to instill property into the Constitution. The reason it was not done so was because a segment of the United States thought that the term property implied ownership of other human beings, and that was objected to by John Adams and some other people, and so they substituted at the last minute pursuit of happiness as a compromise to get people to sign the document and agree to it, and eliminated the word property. I understand why they did it. It's a problem. It continues to be a problem of an understanding of what we mean by property. Some years ago, Michael Novak, the scholar from the Jesuit scholar, just did a wonderful job of explaining in a certain context what we mean by a lot of these issues. He said, we in the West tend to think of the notion of property comes from John Locke. But of course, if that were true, then Moses' commandment that thou shalt not steal would make no sense. It was fundamental, the idea of ownership. Well, that's another word people don't understand. And they don't teach anymore. What does it mean to actually own something? Attending a conference some 30 or more years ago with Milton. Milton was not at that one. Armin Alchin, James Buchanan, some of the other luminary figures of our profession. We had some visitors from Moscow and tried to tell them the importance of property and ownership. The next year, the visitors from Moscow came back and said, we now have the highest home ownership in Moscow of any major city in the world. It was wonderful. How's the market going? No, there's no market. We don't allow them to sell it. We just gave them a certificate saying you own this. Put it in a frame, put it on the wall. So they didn't understand what it is we mean by property because it is not properly taught. What is the use of meaning of property and the transferability of this bundle of rights to the exclusive use of something and to transfer the exclusive use of something. We, the economics profession, simply don't teach that. We don't teach what is meant by a market. What is meant by a market? Well, that's a place in the center of town where you get bread and meat. No, that's not what we mean by markets. In the late 1930s in London, preparing for a speech, Friedrich von Hayek had an inspiration, his aha moment, the light bulb went off. How do you explain to these people that he has to talk to in London, what do we mean by market? And he said, a little translation on my part, but it's the mutualization of dispersed knowledge. Now that doesn't mean a damn thing to most freshmen, but it's important that you teach the idea of what do we mean by a market. And certain of our leaders at times, like Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, the great coincidence of history that they were part of the same man, understood that. Ronald Reagan used the phrase many times before he was governor, while he was in between being governor of California and president. He would talk about the magic of the marketplace. People, for the most part, didn't have a clue what he was talking about. He understood it because he had read Hayek and he'd written about it. And Hayek got the Nobel Prize for his uses of knowledge thing. Again, in the economics profession, we don't teach what we really mean by a market. I remember Václav Klaus in the Czech Republic after the split with Slovakia. He talked about that I want to have a market economy without adjectives. If you really understand what is meant by a market economy, you don't need to talk about it. And the Europeans had all those problems about we want a social market, we want a democratic market, we want this, that, some adjective. But even the expression free market is not necessary if you understand what a market means. If you understand what property is, you don't need to talk about it with modified or adjectives. Back to Madison for a moment. Madison wrote that we have no choice in a democracy but to maintain a species standard until the time comes that we can institutionalize a way to restrain the legislators from their impulse to satisfy the populist impulse, both myself, some of my neighbors, wealth. Fiscal dominance is universal, except in a species standard world. We have a fiat money world now, no constraint. And because of that, we have fiscal dominance, and because of that, we have no institutional way to limit in a democratic process the natural desire, apparently, to redistribute wealth, to vote yourself some of the other person's money. Thomas Jefferson wrote about the natural tendency of things to gravitate towards the center, centripetal forces. And centrifugal forces, moving out from the center, did not happen naturally. He advocated a revolution every 20 years in order to push things back from the center. But the natural course of events is to move towards the center. Governments declare emergencies, more recently the pandemic, and during that they have temporary suspensions of constitutional protections of our rights, including property, to open your business, to serve your customers, to walk on the streets for that matter. We have debt forgivenesses, we have moratoriums on paying your mortgage, on paying your rent, and ultimate total forgiveness of these. We have the phenomenon that's been going on, at least in the United States, of asset forfeiture, following a long history, sometimes an unfortunate history, of the use of the notion of eminent domain. And as a part of that, freedoms that were temporarily suspended was freedom of expression, to give your own opinion about where the damn coronavirus came from in the first place. You're not allowed to say that. You can't depart from the common line. At the root of it all is something that Václav Havel talked about. He was the first president of Czechoslovakia in the Czech Republic, a poet, not an economist or a lawyer or anything like that. Therefore, he's probably more interesting. He wrote that the problem that they were having, people that wanted a rapid transition to democracy and a market economy, didn't understand that after 60 years of suppression under first the Nazis and then the Soviets, the communist system, the fundamental natural response of people to being asked anything was simply to lie. That there was nothing automatic about telling the truth. You, of course, lied to the government, but you got where you lied to your neighbors and your own family. Parents lied to their children, children lied to their parents. He said it'll take generations for the natural instinct is to simply tell the truth. And it doesn't happen automatically. You can't tell these people, okay, now we're going to be a market economy, now we're going to be a democracy, now you must have been forced to tell the truth. And sometimes some of us traveling around the world will say, the weakness of you Americans is you have this hang-up about telling the truth. Well, if that's viewed as a flaw, we've got a very serious problem. But it's true that the idea of oral contracts in the British Empire and the British Commonwealth countries was rare in the world. What Havel called the John Wayne Society. You got my word on it. Let's shake on it. My word is my bond. That is not a natural thing, and it has to be taught. Otherwise, you're not going to have oral contracts that are successful. Speaking of oral contracts, Mike mentions a friend from Hungary, and a case acquaintance from Hungary. One of my first experiences with how people don't understand what we're talking about was I was with a bank and a group wanted to borrow from the bank I was working for, and from Hungary. And the leader of the delegation from Hungary was the vice, what do they call him, number 2 in the whole country, and he was considered a liberal. And listening to all of this after a while, I said, well, okay, in the case of the need for arbitration, mediation or something, do we use the International Court at The Hague? How do we go about settling any kind of disagreement? He says, no, no problem, we have a contract. I said, well, in every contract, there's disagreements, there's something that has to be, so you have to agree in advance how you're going to settle this disagreement, because we have this view about the rule of law, thinking that, okay, that settles it. Then he says, no, we have rule of law too. We believe in rule of law. I am the law. You have a problem, you tell me, and I will fix it. That's rule of law. So we use the expression rule of law, thinking that other people will understand what we mean when we say it. And that is simply not true. We have to teach what we mean by the expression rule of law, just as we have to teach about what really it means to talk about property, what we really mean when we talk about a market, because none of these things automatically resonate with people as to what all we're talking about. We might as well be speaking a foreign language or something. We have a problem, and maybe many others in the world do too, with creeping cronyism. The idea of using the powers of government to assist businesses. Adam Smith warned about the natural tendency of people of commerce to employ the powers of government to their advantage and to the disadvantage of their competitors, innovators. I see that as a government intrusion in the economy in various ways, subsidies, prohibitions, tax favors, tax holidays, any form of cronyism moves away from the idea of a market economy. And to me, this is an attenuation of the fundamental foundation of what we want in an economic freedom of the world, market economies and individual freedom. Gone on too long, but that's because I wrote so many notes. So thank you for being patient and listening to me.
Thank you, Jerry, and you'll be pleased to know that at least one nation managed to put property rights unambiguously into the Constitution. Citizens' lawful private property is inviolate. Article 13 of the People's Republic of China's Constitution. Over to Matt Mitchell.
All right, thank you so much. So Fred framed his talk. Yeah, it's working. Okay, so Fred framed his.
It was on.
That's kind of coming out.
That's okay.
Good.
Fred?
As soon as you say
As soon as I talk, it goes out. Keep trying. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so Fred framed his discussion in terms of, why everything, everywhere, all at once, why is liberty under threat? In some ways, Jerry, I think, is providing a counterpoint in like channeling Thomas Jefferson, which is the natural tendency is for liberty to yield and for government to gain ground. That's the norm, and I think that's true. And you can think about why that's the norm. We have public choice explanations. Power corrupts. Power also discriminates. People have a natural appeal to try to use government to concentrate benefits on themselves and impose costs on others to corner markets. It's an extremely powerful and effective tool if you want to get rich, right? You can use the government. And then we add to that the fact that spontaneous order, Hayek's notion of a market as a way to organize information, is completely alien to many, many people. If you think about the way that you organize your life, if you want to get something done, you don't wait for a spontaneous order to happen. You order it yourself. So a lot of people, approach life that way and organizing society that way, that if you want to get something done, well, of course you have to have the government do it. And so then you add the fact that, we are humans, evolved in a world without impersonal trade. We evolved in a small tribal, communities of a few hundred people, where if you meet somebody and they look different from you, it's probably a good bet that it's not going to be a positive sum interaction with them, right? And so if we carry that intellectual baggage around with us, if markets are not intuitive, and if people can use government to gain, all of this leads to, I think, Jefferson's observation that while freedom is optimal, it's not a stable equilibrium at all. It's always under threat. So now, with this in mind, I have become obsessed with examples where freedom then advances, because I think the exceptions to the rule, they do exist, and they're fascinating, and I want to better understand them. So for the last year or so, I've been studying a few exceptions to the rule, and particularly post-communist societies. And so I just wanted to go through a few examples from one of them, Estonia, to try to better understand. So you've probably heard a little bit about the story of Estonia. It's this small country in the Baltics, dragooned into the Soviet Union, was part of the Soviet Union for 50 years, and they had this remarkable rise. So 1991, they take advantage of the coup against, the failed coup against Gorbachev and declare their own independence. They have this singing revolution, this remarkable event where literally a third of the country gathers in one spot and starts singing. And they start singing Estonian traditional songs instead of the songs in praise of Stalin that they had been forced to sing for half a century. They get together with the other Baltic states. 2 million people hold hands in a 600 kilometer show of support and independence. They do it on August 23rd, 1987, to commemorate the infamous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Okay, so they gained independence. They were, according to the Economic Freedom of the World Index, they were 92nd in the world in in terms of economic freedom in 1992. And by 2010, they were number 10. Their per capita GDP is now about 40,000. They are the wealthiest of the former Soviet states, basically tied with Latvia. They have virtually eliminated corruption. By the Corruption Perceptions Index, they are less corrupt than the United States, tied with Canada at number 14. No other country in the world, in Europe, has more startups per capita. No other country in Europe has more unicorns per capita. Skype, Bolt, these are Estonian companies. So it's this really remarkable set of policies. And I think, I just want to suggest three simple potential explanations for what's going on with Estonia and how they were able to achieve it, and maybe it might shed some light on some other countries. So one is they really emphasized speed and simplicity. So there was a sense, they had previously, by the way, they had 19 years of independence before the Soviets took over. And I think there was a sense in the country, 19 years had gone okay, but they also had drifted towards authoritarianism. And there was a sense that, look, we may not get a third chance. We kind of screwed it up a little bit the first time, we've got to get it right. So there was a real emphasis on let's get it done, and let's get it done very quickly. So Mark, and I think leadership matters. Mark Law was the first prime minister. He liked to quote Maggie Thatcher, and he said, if something needs being done, you don't just stand there clutching your pearls and worrying, you just get it done. So he adopted the appropriately capitalistic phrase, just do it, and that was their emphasis. So they immediately eliminated all tariffs. Pretty remarkable. No, not many countries in the modern world have unilaterally eliminated their tariffs. And they did this partially as a down payment and a commitment device to other reforms. The idea was, okay, if we eliminate tariffs and we suddenly expose all our companies to foreign competition, now we can't hamstring them with regulations and taxes because they've got to compete with the rest of the world. And so this was sort of a really effective commitment device. Similarly, they committed to a monetary board that just completely outsourced monetary policy to Germany. So they pegged their new Estonian mark to the Deutsche Mark, and that was a very effective commitment device. Okay, so they had speed, simplicity, and commitment devices. And then I do think that the culture matters. So Friedman, many of you probably know, when he visited China in 1978, he was asked, what is key for a transition economy? He said, privatize, privatize, privatize. About 20 years later, I think it was in a publication that you wrote, Mike, he had a chance to revise it. And in the preface to a Fraser publication, he said, okay, privatize institutions and privatize. He recognized that you have to have the rule of law, you have to have other institutions in place. I don't want to presume to speak for Milton, but given what's happened in research in the last few years, I would hope that he might now amend it and say, privatize institutions and culture, because culture is policy is downstream from institutions, and institutions are also downstream from culture. And so one of the things that I think Estonia had going for it is this strong cultural identity. These people had gotten together and sung for 5,000 years. They had developed this identity, which did, I think, allow them to have a bit of a group sacrifice that is necessary for that transition, and sort of see them through the other end of it. It's a double-edged sword, though, of course. I think often nationalism can be a very dangerous force. Ironically, I do think in Estonia, at least, nationalism gave them some strength and some kind of resilience to see it through, go through a hard time, and then come through on the other end of it with this extraordinary growth. So those are sort of my remarks. I think that freedom is everywhere and always under threat. But we really should try to make a study of those exceptions to the rule, because they're really remarkable, they're inspiring, and think they may be able to shed light on other countries and other places too. So thank you very much.
Let me make a quick housekeeping note before we go to our next speaker. If you want to intervene, please put your name tag up like that. I think there are some people without them. I have some extras down here, so if you don't have one, just and as I say, indicate your desire to speak by putting your name tag up like that. And now over to John Fund, who I must say, along with the Fraser Institute, led to a dramatic change in course in Canada for the better. One of the few people I know who wrote a single op-ed that, along with Mike's work, changed the fiscal direction of Canada. So, John.
Well, I'm happy to take the credit, but the op-ed was more or less dictated by my father. It was easy and it saved time. All the economists around this table have been playing who is to blame for the status quo, which stands for the mess we're in. And I'm here to tell you that, like Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, everyone you mentioned helped do it. Everyone was wielding a knife. So I want to try to move a little bit further to perhaps an approach of where we go from here. And it's going to verge into some non-economic discussion, including some sociology and, dare I suggest, even politics. And it has to, because remember the words of Pericles. You may not be looking for politics, but politics is always looking for you. And you have to guard against it, and not just with economic tools. What I'm going to suggest is that, like Shakespeare said, we can see through a glass darkly a coalition to fight the forces that we fear and the forces that are dragging us down. But we have to recognize the shape of this new coalition and how to build it, and it's going to be tricky. So, the new challenge that we face that our previous generations didn't is that our enemy is now different. It's no longer class-based, it is identity-based. And it is much less worker-oriented and far more intellectual-oriented. It is, our enemies do not wield guns so much as they wield PhDs. And the expertise that tells the rest of us we should listen to them because they know better and they're the experts. The enemy is different. Therefore, the weapons that we use to fight them must be different. And I'm going to suggest a form of jujitsu. Jujitsu is defined as the martial art of not confronting your enemy directly, but outmaneuvering him using holds, throws, paralyzing blows, and using his strength against him. Now, who is our enemy? Well, I've been confused about this for a long time, and I don't have an answer. But let's focus on one thing that we can all agree on. Where in the world did all these pronouns come from? Where in the world did we who grew up in a world of he and she now have 47 pronouns to deal with, including ZE and ZHER? I mean, I grew up in San Francisco. There is no more liberal place on the planet. I was exposed to every possible form of social nonconformism from the age of 7. And I never even believed we could possibly get where we are. So I've been talking to some of my leftist and centrist friends. You know, what in the world is behind this intersectionality, this identity politics run amok? And I don't have a clear answer, but I do have one answer that made some sense. James Kirchick, who's a leading gay historian, he's written a book, for example, on the Red Scare in Washington in the 1950s, but he happens to be a closet conservative, told me, well, I've had as much to do as possible in talking with them, because I believe that their struggle to muddle you know, what the new rights and freedoms are and who's on top and who deserves privileges, destroys our cause. We wanted to join mainstream society, we wanted to have gay marriage, we wanted to have all of these things, and it waters it down, confuses it, and turns people against us. So where does this come from? And he said, I've talked to them, and I conclude that there are two groups of people pushing this. One group that is intimidated by the first, they're scared of them, they dare not challenge them. And the second group, frankly, are nihilists. These are people who do not support traditional society or civilization as we conventionally understand it. They are not nonconformists. They're not social libertarians. They are nihilists. They want to, frankly, destroy the bourgeois society that Deirdre McCloskey so celebrated in her books. They want to destroy it. And they want to rebuild anew. Just like the communists, but with a different basis, a different set of strangleholds on people's thought, but the same weapons: conformity, force, fear. Well, we have to find a way to confront that. Now, here are some promising signs. If you go to any group of liberals and you gain enough confidence with them, they will tell you they're almost as scared of these people as we are. Almost. A faculty member with tenure, the tenure doesn't mean anything today. You can be thrown out of the university. Look at the guy at Princeton. He had tenure, it didn't matter. His career was completely destroyed because a group of people wanted to go after him for mislabeling someone's gender. These are frightening people. They're frightened of them too. People in the entertainment industry, in the movie industry, people in the creative industry. Talk to the great playwright David Mamet, who's come over to our side, largely because he read Milton Friedman and Hayek, believe it or not. We have potential allies there we don't spend enough time cultivating. If there's one thing you take away from what I'm telling you today, it is we have to start broadening our conversational base. We have to start talking to new people because they are potential allies. So running through this, politics has changed. We all grew up in a world where, whether or not it was true, almost everyone believed the rich would vote for the status quo and the poor would be the revolutionaries, the unrest from below. That is no longer the case. It's not just in the United States. In democracy after democracy and throughout the world, the working class and the poor are opposed to these forces. They're opposed to these attacks on traditional values, on civilization, on the proper way of living. It's not that these people are on our side or have read our books or understand economic concepts, but in every democracy, the majority of people consist of people who want to forget about politics and get on with the serious business of living. They want a quiet life and a better life for their children. What is a life that's not political? It's about the most important things in life: your family, your faith, your hobbies, your experiences, living a good life. That's what's really important. The vast majority of people aren't interested or obsessed with politics. Our opponents are, and that can be their weakness. That can be their weakness. So what we have to do is this. It's been proven in Brexit, it's been proven by Trump, flawed as he is, and it's being proven in democracies all around the world. The average person is rising up against this insanity. Alejandro Chefwan and I were talking. The poll in Argentina that just came out, from the pollster that got the last election right, that the Peronists were going to do better, have just come out with a poll of 3,000 people in Argentina, one of the largest polls ever taken in the country. Shows Milei ahead 4 or 5 points, but that's not the important thing. It's the crosstabs, the subcategories, that tell you who is voting for it. If you're not a public employee and you're not a union member, if you're just an average person, and especially a young person, you're voting for Milei. If you're rich and well-connected and benefit from the current system, you're voting for the Peronists. This is unprecedented. And it is not just in Argentina, it is in other countries that you are intimately aware with. It is tribalism in part, but it's also, we know who wants to mess with our lives, and we don't like it. Grover Norquist understands this as well. He has meetings in every state in the country, the coalition. It's called the Leave Us Alone Coalition. People who want to be left alone, versus the Takings Coalition, which is what the left wing runs. And by the way, he has meetings in 22 countries, including Argentina, Chile, Colombia. Every country that we are involved with should have a meeting, a coalition meeting of everyone, small business people, people who are concerned about crime, people who are concerned about homeschooling, people who are concerned about any number of issues that want to be left alone. We need to reach them and talk to them. We may not have much in common with the truck driver who stood in the blockades in Ottawa, Canada, to protest the insane mandates and lockdowns. We may not have that much in common with him, but we share something we can fight against. A coalition in a democracy must get 50% plus one. Must. There's no other way around it. Either in a combination of parties or in our US system, 2 parties. We can only get that if we assemble a coalition, which will include an awful lot of people you would not invite home for dinner. You would not invite home for dinner naturally. Doesn't mean you don't like them, it's just you don't have that much in common with them. But we do have something in common with them. We are opposed to this insanity. And we must find everyone in the world, in every democracy, who agrees with us and doesn't want to live their life scared and confused and governed by pointy-headed intellectuals and experts who really aren't experts. If we can form that coalition, we don't all have to agree. In fact, we can disagree on an awful lot. But if we do agree on those fundamentals, and we do agree on who the enemy is, we can fight them and we can beat them.
Yes, please go ahead. Jerry, you got your...
Assuming this works, and I enjoyed John's remarks very much. It was very, very interesting and motivating. But it was inspired by something that Matt said about Milton Friedman's comment after China's recommendation, China privatized. About 20 years ago or more, Mike and I think Ralph Lewis was there at a conference where Milton Friedman had become a regular also. And somebody in a general session asked Milton an Oprah Winfrey kind of question that made the rest of us all groan. What do you regret most in your career? And they're all, most of us, how do you handle this one? And Milton, in his usual way, was able to actually respond very respectfully, but actually at a point that was very strong, I thought. He said, I wish that 30 years ago I would have spent more time trying to understand what Jim Buchanan was trying to teach us. And I think that this is something that we in the United States in particular, but I hope around the world, will start to focus more on the idea of the public choice and what that adds to the discipline of economics and understanding of the interaction of the individual with the state, with the authorities, is very powerful. And I know as a graduate student myself, even though I had 1 year overlapping with Jim, didn't really understand or appreciate what public choice had to say to us all. Just as Milton Friedman was saying, even he didn't appreciate how powerful and important it was.
Okay. Mike is next on the speaking list. I'm going to mention something that I heard Mike say once, and I'm going to do it before Mike speaks so he can correct me if I've got it wrong. I think, Mike, Jerry, you were talking about economists not having good accounting skills. I think I once heard Mike say that Milton Friedman became an economist because he failed his accounting exams. So over to Mike.
My question, John, to you is, I agree exactly with what your analysis. But that's not enough. How do we measure? No, I'm serious. We've got to think how we can catalog what you said in a way that we can measure. Now, we're not going to do that right now, but I want you to promise me that we're going to have an ongoing conversation. We're going to think about how we can document what you're talking about. Because there's no point. You make a very impressive case, but unless we can figure out a way to say, yeah, it used to be this way, and now you see.
I'll be very brief. We can do blending. Sometimes, if you blend different things in a fuel, you can increase the performance. We take the measurement that is vital and essential, and that so many of these people around this room have participated in, and we have to combine it with something a little more amorphous, which is people's loyalty to country, to tradition, to values, to common sense. Those are not as easily measured, but they can be. But they can be a little. And certainly elections help, and sophisticated focus groups and public opinion help. And what we can do is we have to drive through the famous answer to the famous phrase, "What have you done for me lately?" We now see in the public opinion polls that Biden is collapsing, that people actually are comparing in their own mind, what was my life like under the 4 years of Trump policies, not necessarily Trump rhetoric, but Trump policies versus Biden policies, where supposedly everyone is quiet and civil to each other. They are preferring the policies where their average income in real terms was going up, and it's not now. And inflation still, the new poll came out today, Democratic National Committee poll. Today, 38% of people say they know the numbers that say inflation is coming down in the United States, but they don't believe them. They don't believe the data. So I think we can use our data that is empirically sound. We can confront our opponents, because as we know, they lose on the numbers. You've proven that. That's what your economic freedom thing is all about. And then we have to find a way to take that, simplify it, concretize it, and take that to appeal to the emotions, the identities, and the common sense of the average person.
Alex.
I learned a lot from many of you. I
Sorry,
perhaps-
speaking
I
of-
can-
No, I don't need this.
Sorry, no, I learned a lot from many of his comments. I think I have on record Milton Friedman being asked the same question, and he actually replaced, privatize, with rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. And I started my week last week at the Montpellier Society in Better World, and Professor McCluskey basically something I did not agree. He said, argued that it's very easy to measure these issues of ethics and culture. I have seen many of these efforts, and they are very flawed. But on the issues of identities or among you being politically correct, we're afraid even to measure chromosomes. Correct, we say matter and man, so and we can come up with any definition of life and playing the game. The truth doesn't exist. We can make it. As Keynes said, we're on the dictionary now. So we can call money whatever we want.
Hello. Well, I'll give my 2 cents based on what John said. My name is Marcelo Faria from Instituto Liberal de São Paulo. And we have a project called Freedom to Work. And why not freedom, economic freedom? Because people don't understand what is it. And we got that from a project from India. When they went on the streets to talk with people that you need more economic freedom, people thought that it was for the rich, not for me.
Right.
And then we realized that, okay, first we need to change the name, because people don't really understand economic freedom. I love their work. I think If it wasn't a prize from the state-owned bank, we will have a Nobel Prize winner here for sure. But people don't understand what economic freedom is. So we changed the first thing to freedom to work. Because they cannot understand economic freedom, but they understand that the poor guy doesn't need a paper to work. The poor guy doesn't need a permit to make a living. And we have plenty of problems here in Brazil with that. Our project started with a story like that, because it was a poor guy in the 5,000 inhabitant cities in the middle of nowhere in Goiás, another state, rural area. Guy created a factory to make cheese, and one day the state was there, the health surveillance was there, and said you need to make a half a million new building here just to be regulated by us. And the guy freaked out because of that and some other issues with bureaucracy, and ended up killing himself because of that, because he didn't have a piece of paper. So we wrote about that in our website. We had more than 1 million people reading that news. We have a small website, and we had more than 1 million people reading about that. But then afterwards we realized, okay, but what can we do to change that? And I'm not an economist. I'm a business manager. I'm an entrepreneur, and I want results and change things. So, based on what John said, and based on what Reagan said about the one that agrees with me 80% and disagrees 20% is my ally, it's not my enemy. So we can agree on disagreeing on 20%, but we can work with the 80% that we agree. And we decided to create a project just to remove the barriers to become an entrepreneur in Brazil. So basically removing permits and licenses from health surveillance, from environmental surveillance, firefighters, depending on the state, it takes like 4 or 5 years just to get a license from the firefighters, and we are dealing that properly. So my first thing is about sometimes you don't need to learn how to cheat. Sometimes it's about changing the world. People can understand that you don't need a license to work. You don't need people going there to take your popcorn, your little popcorn seller in the middle of the street because they don't have a piece of paper, like we had yesterday here at São Paulo. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that the left wing does pretty good, and you can do that when you make more concrete things like removing barriers to entrepreneurship, is tell stories. Like I just told you a small one. They are very good at storytelling, very good. And we can do the same. When you do more concrete things, and we do measure, we do have a measure there. We have a whole website measured for now 5,000 cities, one by one. So to see if they approve the law or not. And but when you have more concrete things, you can tell stories, and it's emotions that drive motion. So people are moved more by emotion than by rational things. So that's my 2 cents about it. Thanks.
If I could do a 30-second commercial, I happen to be, among my many hats, a consultant for a new company called Palladium Pictures. It's run by a gentleman named Michael Pack, who ran the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe for the Trump administration. And he's also produced 15 documentaries that actually were aired on PBS, including one on Clarence Thomas you might have seen. He wants to reach the people who do not automatically agree with us, as he did on PBS. And what we're looking for is 2 things. We are looking for subjects to do short documentaries on. We're looking to partner with think tanks, mostly in the United States, but we're willing to look at others. And we've just signed a contract with the Wall Street Journal editorial page to produce their documentaries for them, because they don't trust their own in-house services to do it. So we now are the official Good Housekeeping seal of approval documentary filmmaker for the Wall Street Journal editorial page where I worked for many years. Secondly, we have a new incubator program. We are looking, because every film school in the United States and probably in your countries as well, every film school is run by the left, and they have a pipeline to make documentaries that are ideologically consistent only with their point of view. We have to form our own network. So we want to provide internships, paid internships to young filmmakers, and it can be open to people who are not American or US citizens, to learn the business, to learn how to make a film, which is a collaborative effort, and we want to invite you to submit applications. I have my business card here, I can also give you my email, and we're looking for people probably under the age of 30, but might go up to 35, and they probably have to make it to the United States or live in the United States, but we provide training and we provide them something to work on so they can start building a portfolio of work, and we welcome any suggestions you have for young people who are interested in this. We have lots of writers. We have enough economists for a while. We need storytellers and filmmakers.
Thank you. This is something that has never happened before in any economic freedom of the world meeting. There's nobody with their placard up to speak. I've never seen that in any meeting here. I hope somebody will put their placard up while I'm talking. I'm just going to mention something. We're here talking about the stability of economic freedom. Now, unfortunately, Bob Lawson is very sick with either a virus or food poisoning from the Matt Pellerin Society. He was going to discuss some of his findings. I know a little bit of what they are, so I'll put them on the table. And that is that in reviewing the literature, we, on our side of the street, talk about poverty and the importance of poverty reduction, and less about inequality. In fact, most of us regard inequality as not much of a problem so long as all boats are rising and poverty is being reduced. What Bob has found is that economic freedom, in reviewing the literature, as a preliminary result, appears to be most stable in countries with low levels of inequality. In other words, there is an inverse relationship between the stability of economic freedom and inequality. I'll give one example, a vivid. In a recent study about free market attitudes, the nation that came in second in favor of free markets was Sweden. And in fact, all the Nordic nations tended to have well above average support of free markets. Whereas a nation like Chile, which has seen an economic and human miracle, and Ralph Lutters was a big part of that economic and human miracle, has very low levels of support for free markets, and that is at least in part attributable to high levels of inequality, at least according to Bob's review of the literature. Now, Bob had told me he had other little bombshells to drop at this meeting, and unfortunately the flu dropped a bombshell on him, so he's not here. But I find that an absolutely fascinating and important result that we should pay attention to. Okay, Alex, Vladimir, and I think Jerry.
Yeah, what Fred says, again, about Scandinavia, really many of our people, some people use Scandinavia as an example of socialism, others as an example of capitalism. Really, it's a mixed economy with a huge social spending state, but respect for rule of law, which almost doesn't exist in 2/3 of the world, and I don't think we incorporate it enough what it means to have this lack of rule of law, and especially chronic capitalism. By the way, I have been for 10 years trying to get foundations to support mimicking what Fraser has done with economic freedom, with chronic capitalism. Everything is anecdotal today. My work in Latin America is really damaged by many of my friends being on the pocket of a Mexican who got a $900 million contract, no big contract, to run all the credit card payments of AMLO, the socialist, you know, and that's over and over and over and over. And but I think when I said tribalism, you know, I remember when Trump was rising up, Obama says, no, I am the true populism. And we have to define that populism itself for something that's popular and saying has no cost, you know, like building the wall for Trump. But, you know, but then on the tribalism, I meant the tribalism of the PhDs, of the elites. How many of us have parental sight, this great school of public policy in Colombia? You know? I love them, that's just whatever, but they really think, honestly, they have to rule the world. You know, they say, oh, are you going to democracy? You see who runs the things. So in Argentina, so there is tribalism in both sides, not only in the people who are revolting. And in Argentina, you know, it is the elites that have access to these privileged contracts are the ones that are populists on one side or tribals, but Milei's people are a little bit, you know, tribal, you know, but because no one knows who's going to pass, how we're going to dollarize, how we're going to open up the economy from one day to the other. But it's an interesting experience.
In fact, just a very quick intervention.
In August, in Mar del Plata, which is the resort community in Argentina, south of Buenos Aires, there was an annual meeting of all of the business people, the business elites. And there was a scientific poll taken of these 300 or 400 business leaders. Who do you support in the upcoming primary election? And the candidates were, you know them. Milei had 3%. 3%. So when we say our enemy is the elite, I agree with Alex. It is not just the intellectual elite, it's not just the academic elite, it's not just the identity elite. It is the elite who managed to succeed in the system we have now. And that, picking up on the discussion with the people in the street, is how we win. We are used to, we all belong to an elite of some kind. We can keep that, but we have to change our language. We have to seize the dictionary and redefine what elite means to the people we're trying to convince.
Thanks. I just want to mention, Denmark, which is the star Nordic state, is the 5th economically freest nation on the planet. They may have big social spending, which may help keep economic freedom stable. But as Alex was saying, in every other aspect of their public structure, they are pro-free market. I'd also note that you were talking about pro-capitalism growing here. I remember at one meeting of like-minded people, I said I was concerned about the growth of 15,000 lobbyists in Washington being a sign of crony capitalism, and the meeting revolted against me. How can you say that? These people are essential to writing legislation. Where are we going to get the expertise if we don't have the lobbyists writing the legislation? Which I thought rather proved my point. Vladimir.
Well, I'd say something about inequality. In particular, this is an issue in Brazil. Usually in a classical liberal or libertarian meeting, inequality is a bad word because associated with the free market economy. So we are not equal. Someone who has a talent or a gift or the entrepreneur, innovator must receive his compensation. So that's why we're unequal. But we're not discussing free market economy, we're discussing real economy and with crony capitalism. So when we discuss inequality in Brazil, it's not an issue, it's an issue of poverty, but it's an issue of an economy that has been protected since the 50s with an elite of businessmen that are very connected to the state and protective policies that increase inequality by means of lobbying, connection to the government, supporting campaigning, while the entrepreneur, the low class, the workers has difficulty to sell popcorn on the streets. So we must discuss inequality. Inequality in a chronic capitalism economy. And this is an issue. Inequality cannot be a bad word. Would be a bad word if you are living in a free market economy, in an ideal world. But it's not the case. So when you go down the streets in Brazil, mainly in urban areas after pandemics, and see people living on the streets, it's an issue. While the high business class is being protected, very well connected to the government, while the bureaucracy's currents keep increasing their standard of living. So that's my point.
Okay. Technically, we have 5 minutes left and over 5 speakers. I think I'm going to allow us to go on a little bit long, but I'm going to strictly stick to the people and limit to the people who now have their placards up, and we won't have any other interventions. So we'll just go through the speakers, and I'll go around the table like that. You're welcome. No. So, Matt.
Just a quick reaction on the, as we're talking about language and the words we use, and Alex, I want to hear more about your idea of measuring crony capitalism. I would suggest we don't use the phrase crony capitalism. To me, I think the problem is favoritism. You know, crony is comes from chronos, and you go back in time, a chum, a friend. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, we marry, we date, we hire based on the recommendations of our friends. That's not the problem. The problem is policies that discriminate, that favor one group over another, and a lot of those are based on connections, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're based on, you know, discriminating in favor of large firms or, you know, farmers who have no connection to the Secretary of Agriculture, but still are favored, right? So I think we should be framing that problem in terms of discrimination, favoring one group and disfavoring other groups. And we have really missed an opportunity to appeal to a broader audience by always talking about freedom. We should talk about freedom, but we should also be really, really opposed to discrimination, government discrimination, because that's, I said it earlier, but power corrupts, but power also discriminates. If you look at the way that it's wielded, it's almost always in a discriminatory manner.
Thank you. And the next speaker, please. Sorry. No, we're going around the table like that. So.
Hi, my name is Marise Schultz. I'm a sociologist, not socialist. And I'm a teacher of at a seminar about Marx and Marxism for liberals or people who are not leftist. And I have doubt is woke ideology is a really type of Marxism. And my question is, because in Brazil some conservatives are becoming anti-American because some response of woke ideology. And my question is about, do you think this ideology is similar in any way to movement of 70s? And how do you think is the consequence about the woke in international relation?
I couldn't understand what you said. Is it similar to what exactly?
Movements in 70s.
Like the Tupamaros and things like that. Okay.
Because Marcos and the other.
Okay. Well, I've spoken enough, so I'll be extremely brief.
Yes, and we need to not just oppose them, we need to make fun of them. Satire is the most effective political weapon. How many of you know the filmmakers, the Coen brothers? They did the movie Fargo. Okay, their movies are beloved by critics, except for one. One movie was savaged by the film critics. You know which one it was. It was called Hail Caesar.
It was a film about Hollywood in the 1950s. Believe it or not, starring George Clooney. It was a vicious satire about communists who were actually trying to take over Hollywood in the 50s. And it was about Russian spies, real Russian spies from the Soviet Union. And the central figure behind this communist conspiracy in Hollywood, satirizing the film, is Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School. He is a character in this film, and so is his cat, Marx, and his dog, Lenin. And it is hilarious. The man is incomprehensible. And you just fall down laughing that anyone ever listened to this guy. So I agree with you, yes, the Frankfurt School had tentacles already in the 70s with these groups, and now they've used identity politics as the replacement for the class struggle. We have to recognize the evolution of them, or the perversion of them, and we also have to not only oppose them, but we have to use popular culture to satirize and make fun of them. Because in addition to all of their thoughts, it just doesn't make sense.
We're technically at the end of time, so we're just going to follow the speakers list. Jerry?
Okay, couple comments related to things that have been brought up here. First, about the language that we use to talk to people, whether it's economic, creative, or other expressions that we use. One of my first lessons about how to be careful about this. Back in the 80s, it was popular in Europe to talk about the third way. So I went to a seminar, a book presentation. It was going to be, the title of this thing was going to be El Otro Sendero. And I thought it was sort of a Latin America version of the third way. And I found out that, that was not what it was. I listened to the presentation and talked afterwards. I said, but you're just talking about capitalism. He said, no. You don't use the word capitalism in Latin America because that means mercantilist oligarchs. You have to have a third way. And I said, well, all that is Adam Smith. And he said, don't tell anyone. This is important. So I learned, don't say the word capitalist or capitalism because of that understanding. As far as the inequality issue, which I think is super important to understand better and the importance of it, about 40 years ago, maybe more, I don't remember, a couple professors at Carnegie Mellon University, Alan Meltzer, who most everyone will know, and Scott Richards, his co-author, wrote a paper that's very rarely read by anybody, about income, but basically it's a mathematical model, and really, for me, very difficult to understand, about the proof of when the mean income of a society gets sufficiently above the income of the median voter, you have this instability, and you're going to have a condition in which the voters are going, in a democratic system, are going to try to redistribute wealth through a political process. And to me, it's an important paper, though it's a very difficult paper for me.
Hi, Joe Costa from Institute Millennium. So I also want to touch on the issue of identity politics. And I think there is a trap that we can fall there, which is that if we appeal to the masses, we can change societies. And it's easy to appeal to the instincts of the masses when they don't conform with those slogans of the elites. But you do have to engage with the intellectual classes and with the elites. We saw in this country that it's possible to win elections and do not change societies if you don't win the war of ideas. And that battle is disputed in universities, in academia, in the media. And I do think that to have a better understanding of what this intellectual movement actually is wants and where it can come from, I think that's very important. And I don't think that maybe we are at the position that liberals were in the mid-20th century with respect to socialism and communism that we are with identity politics. Know that Yasha Monk released a book called Identity Trap, which is, I think, a very fine book. It tries to trace the origins to Foucault, Derek Bell, Edward Said, and see what this new synthesis is like. And I do think that many of their agenda, separatism, intersectionality, equity, which is like positive discrimination, I do think that these agendas will keep moving forward if we don't have actually the intellectual means to stop them. And I don't think that's just decided in the ballots. That's decided with intellectual engagement. And we should not forget that Paul Johnson in modern times said that Bolshevism was never a majority opinion in Russia. Actually, communism was never a majority opinion. Hayek talks about this, was never a majority opinion about the masses. Nevertheless, they gained influence enough to change societies, and we need to engage with them at that same level. And I do think that requires studies, requires very carefully crafted arguments, so we can defeat the identitarian trap.
Thank you. I just want to tell an anecdote. You were talking about a lot about the Scandinavian countries. Last year I was in Stockholm in a meeting with politicians, and one leader union told that they believe in free markets, they believe in private property, they defend it because they want their businesses, the Swedish private owner businesses, to grow, because they want to ask them a lot. And I raised my hand and I told him I'm from Bolivia and I began a project to spread these ideas in my country. And I told him, if the socialists, if the left in my country would say what you, the left in Sweden, are saying, I retire. I don't have anything to do in my country. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you. Leonardo Sigues from Viera, Bolivia. Well, I just loved about Bob Lawson's idea of this inverse relationship between inequality and stability of economic freedom. I'd like to think more of, and I'd love to read more about this hypothesis. I'd like to think about less inequality as a long-term outcome, maybe, of economic freedom. In connection to what Vladimir said, because of this government discrimination, as Matt might have said, or crony capitalism, is the cause for inequality in our countries. So I think maybe the answer can be in a long-term outcome of economic freedom that promotes less inequality of a society. No, that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. By the way, just I should mention one empirical result. Economic freedom is a wash of inequality. Economically free countries tend not to have more or less inequality, but nonetheless, inequality seems to be a destabilizing factor. Look, thank you all for this marvelous thing. We are now only 7 minutes behind schedule, which must be a record for this meeting on being on time. I'm going to suggest that we try to finish the coffee break by 10 to 11, so that we'll then be only 5 minutes behind schedule. And then we'll hand things over to Jared. Thank you very much for a terrific session.